welcome to this RapidDeploy version 4.1 guide. My name is Richard Bettison, and today we're going to be looking at the new features of RapidDeploy 4.1. So RapidDeploy 4.1 was released a couple of months ago, and I just wanted to really go through and show you some of the new features above and beyond RapidDeploy 4.0 that we've introduced in this release. So I'm just going to go through and show you some of those features as they occur in the application. So I'm going to go ahead and log on. You'll see the logon page there looks slightly different, and you'll see the first page that we come to also looks a little different. So we now have a dashboard on the front page showing some metrics about what's going on in RapidDeploy. We will be extending these metrics in the 4.1 release to enable drill down to all of these individual metrics. First metric here on the left hand side shows the number of successful project jobs that have occurred in the last week. So you can see that the rev count is in the green here, 86% success, and also here the average time the execution took to complete. We also have a metric about the last month activity in terms of the activity from each user. So we'll see a list there of descending users from the most active to the least active. And then on the top right here we have Deployer of the Week, which is the person who has instigated the most successful deployments during the past week. Just underneath that we can see all the jobs that have ever been performed, and what percentage were completed, failed, unexecuted, etc. Then down here we've got last 2 weeks project jobs activity, so which projects have been doing the most deployments and which have done the least. Then we have jobs by day metric, just showing how many jobs have been run on each day over the past 2 weeks. And then finally at the bottom we've got a row showing approvals, so how many jobs have been approved and how many have been rejected over the last 2 weeks, and also all time authorized, and then a month by month over the last 6 months of all jobs run by month and the average time taken. So as I say, we will be extending those metrics to drill down to get further information as we continue with the 4.1 releases, but that's what we've done to start with. Then if we go into projects, we'll be able to see some other changes we've made. Well, the first obvious change is we now have the graphical orchestration, so that you can now more easily create your orchestrations. It's not just a list view. We've added the target specific orchestrations, so you can just add a target specific orchestration here. What that means is in RapidDeploy by default we want to make all the orchestrations environment neutral, so the same orchestration will run on every target, but that's not always possible. So for example in production we might need to run a check against a change management tool or something like that, or we might, there might be something specific we need to do in a particular environment. So what we do is we add a target specific task by clicking here, and then we can add new targets by clicking over here when we've highlighted the target specific task. You add a new target and all the available targets will be shown, less the ones that you've already added. So I've already added a target for the development environment, so in this case I've got a test and a prod that I could add. I'm not going to actually add those. And then in each one of those you can add a set of target specific tasks that you want to run only on that target. So in this case the target is in the development environment, and I'm just running a command in this case to stop the firewall in that environment because I know that there's something I need to deal with on the firewall there. So I just added that task briefly. Okay, so that's one thing we've added. And another thing we've added is these conditional tasks. So you can see up here we've got an add while task and an add if task. So here we've got an if task. Now the if task works on a conditional parameter, which is a boolean, which is an output from a previous task, and I'll come to that in a moment. So this will be a Boolean, true or false. We can act on that. If it's true, then we're going to run down this branch, and if it's false, we're going to run down this branch. You can put these anywhere in your orchestration, and they'll then return to the main line. So what we're saying here, just to show this, is we're getting the Java version. This is another thing we've done in all of our tasks, or many of our tasks. We've added the ability to have an output parameter. So the output of that command will go into this output parameter, which can then be used by any subsequent task in the orchestration. So we take that output parameter and make it the input string into this task here, which is a contains string task. So we're going to check the output from that Java-version to see whether it contains 1.8. And this contains string task will say, well, if it does contain 1.8, then this will be true, and if it doesn't, it will be false. And then we're using that contains result here. And if true, then we know we're using 1.8, so we continue with the deployment. And if false, we run a fail task. And a fail task is simply a task that allows us to output an error message and fails the job entirely. Okay, we also have the ability to add while tasks, so you can put a while loop in and sleep and wait for something to happen and have any number of tasks in there, and then when the parameter changes, it can continue, and the while task can also have a timeout on it. So that gives you some idea around conditionals and around this new UI orchestration map, where you can actually just add things as you wish. So for example, if I were to come down to here, I can just highlight this task. I could add a new target specific task if I wanted to in there, and then I could add a target to it, for example, say the production environment, and then underneath there I could add a task of any kind. So I could just send an email, for example. So it's quite easy to create these orchestration maps. The same with the if task. It works in exactly the same way. Okay, so I'm now going to go back and I'm going to show you one other little feature that we've added. So I'm going to just go click on this test 1A project here. Now, before version 4.1, we could always set for a task fail on error true or false. And if we set fail on error to true, we would see this red line coming out, and it would just go down to fail. And we couldn't do anything else, it would just fail the job at that point. So now we've added a new feature to allow us to add failure branches. So this time this backup task you can see is using failure branch 1. We can add new failure branches, or we can use any existing failure branches in this orchestration. In this case, failure branch 1 is going to run another task before it fails. And then we have this WebSphere deployment task has just a failure branch, and this failure branch is calling actually two different tasks before the final fail is called. Now, what that means is that when your job fails at any point during the orchestration, you can add custom tasks to clear up what's happened, to roll back, to run something else, to send an email, to do anything you want to do, and use any tasks that you want from the entire task palette as part of that failure branch. And you can have multiple failure branches. And so another feature that we've added here is the ability to add an RD job task. And what that means is that I can make a call from one orchestration in one project at some point during that orchestration out to another orchestration to call another orchestration from another project. So for example, after I've done a WebSphere deployment task, I might want to add an RD job task. This is what we call a linked deployment. So once I've called the WebSphere deployment task, I'm going to make an outbound call back to RapidDeploy. I need to add an authentication token. I enter a project name, a server and environment, so a target and an application. And then I put a package name in for that orchestration to run, or I can choose latest if I leave it blank. And that will run that job on that selected target. And I can run that synchronously and wait for it to return before I then continue on in my existing task, or I can run it asynchronously and have them run in parallel. And what I could also do, of course, is I could create a project which was a rollback project, and then I could add this run RD deployment task to a failure branch. So I right-click on this. We've now added the right-click ability to do some context-sensitive things, such as move the tasks up and down, copy the task to allow us to copy and paste it elsewhere, or remove it. So I'm going to copy that task, and then I'm just going to paste it into this failure scenario here. And so you can see now that under this failure scenario I can actually call another project. Perhaps that project is just being used for a rollback. Okay, so that's a quick overview of the new orchestration features that we've added to the tool. Now we can have a look at some of the new tasks that we've added. So I'm just going to go to Add Task here, and we can see that these are the new conditional tasks we've added. The if task and fail task we've covered. The string check task allows us to test whether or not a string is equal or not equal to another string, or if it's empty. And we have the number check task. This allows us to check whether a number is greater than, less than, equal to, or whatever, and depending on the result will return true or false. So the result parameter is here. We then have some additional string tasks that we've set here. So replace string will take an input string and do a regular expression search on it and do a replacement and place that in an output parameter. We have a substring task which will take a string and output a substring of that string based on the begin and end index. We have a contain string task which will check whether or not a string contains another string, and if it does, return true; if it doesn't, false. And a match string task which is similar but uses a regular expression. We have some additional file-based tasks. So we have a list files task and list files in a directory. Get file permissions is a new task that we've added. We'll get the file permissions of a particular file. The list files task will list the files in a particular directory into a string, which you can then manipulate later. There's also a read file task, which will read an entire file into a string, and a write string to file task, which will take a string that you already have as an input parameter and write that out to a file. So these are just some additional tasks that we've created in this version of RapidDeploy. And one other useful task that I do just want to mention before we go, underneath the execute section, we've got this run defined script task. So if I were to add that, what this allows us to do is, instead of actually including the script in our project, packaging it up and versioning it and so on as we would normally do, and allowing us to run any script with, passing environment variables as we want to and passing parameters as we want to, we thought, well, perhaps sometimes people might just want to take the contents of their script and literally paste it into a task. So here you can, put the content of your script directly into a task, so you no longer need to maintain the script itself. You just put it in the task. You can put the arguments you want to pass to that script here. You can add down at the bottom here any environment variables that you want to add that the script uses. So if the script uses $home, for example, you can set what $home should be, and maybe that should be an actual literal value, or perhaps you want it to be a data dictionary item, so it can be different between each environment, or perhaps you just leave it blank and let it pick it up from the operating system on the server where it's running. So all of these things are allowed, and we just thought that that might be quite useful for people to use, instead of having to manage their scripts and use the actual script inside the task. Okay, so I think that more or less covers orchestration. Now we're going to go and have a look at the pipeline section. Now, if you remember from previous versions, job plans previously, or pipelines, were just lists of projects to run either in parallel or serially. We've now changed that, much the same as we have with the orchestration, to be a graphical interface. So for example, I can show you this Tomcat dev to prod pipeline. Here you can see it. And now it's a nice graphical interface. You can add, for each plan, you can add a new pipeline, so you can have multiple pipelines in each plan. Each pipeline can have multiple steps. The steps can be automatic or manual. So you can click the edit button here to edit any highlighted item on this pipeline, or you can double click and that will bring it up. So you can either enable manual execution or have automatic. If you enable manual execution, you can set a timeout and whether or not to continue on the timeout or to end the execution. On the start, you can set just to start when you run the job, or you can enable scheduled execution, and then you can say, well, I want it to start on a particular day and at a particular time, and I want it to repeat, you know, let's say hourly, repeats every, let's say 2 hours, and ends, you know, on a different day. And you can save that, and this will then show as scheduled. We can also add any projects in here. So for example, here we're deploying the Tomcat 7 install project. We're deploying to the binaries to the development environment. Now we're choosing a new version. So that what that means is every time I run this pipeline, a new package will be created and deployed. So we can choose here to choose any previous packages that we've got. Latest version will choose whatever the latest package currently is. So at the moment that would actually choose 003, but if we created another package it would be then 004 or 005, and a new version will create a new version each time we run the deployment. So this one is installing some Tomcat binaries in the development environment. It's then running the examples web app project to deploy the examples web app to those binaries once they've been installed, and it's doing this automatically, so it's going to go straight from running this project target to running this project target and this project target in parallel. So again, we're using new version, so it's going to create a new version of this project. This project has also got 3 historical versions. Again, we can use new or latest. And it's also going to run the Java Deploy 40 project in parallel with this one, and again a new version. Now the Java Deploy 40 project is just a project that deploys a jar file and runs it. And this has actually got 4 previous versions, but again we're using new version, so it will create a version 005. Now when you select a version of a particular project in a pipeline, that version will be displayed all the way through that pipeline, because of course we don't want to be deploying one version to development and then a different version to test and prod. So make sure that you're forced to deploy whatever version was the first version will be the version that goes all the way through. In this project we're deploying, in this pipeline we're deploying 3 projects. So as I've said, we've covered it into development, then doing the same thing into test. It's going into the test environment now, the Tomcat 7 install, examples web app, and Java Deploy. Now if any of the if this install is already done, then this installation will not overwrite the existing installation. I'll only do it if it's not installed. And then here we've got a promotion job, so you can add a promotion job here. This allows you to promote each of the versions from the build store to the promotion store, which is where it needs to be before it can be deployed to production. And then we're deploying through to our production environment. So we've also set this to be auto. Now at any point in this pipeline you can basically highlight the project, right click and go to project, and that will take us to the Tomcat 7 install project, and we can see the tasks that are going to run on that development environment for that project. And I can just go back from there and I can have a look at the same thing on the examples web app project. So if I go to that project, we'll see that this one is effectively just doing a war expander search and replace, starting the Tomcat server and doing the Tomcat deployment. And similarly, we can do the same thing for the Java Deploy 40 project. And that's really just running a command, running that Java archive. Okay, so that kind of covers the pipelines. We will be adding more features to the pipeline during this 4.1. So in the step phase here, we'll be able to add in a release coming out very shortly, the ability to call any web service and act on the results of that web service to determine if we go forward to the next step, if we wait and poll again later, or if we fail the entire pipeline. The security of pipelines can be when you create a new pipeline, you can create it only to be used by you. Then you can promote it if you wish to be used by any group that you're a member of, or you can promote it to be entirely public and visible to all users. Now that doesn't mean that all users will be able to run the pipeline. They would still only be able to run the pipeline if they had the necessary permissions to run the jobs on all of the targets that have been indicated in that pipeline. Okay, so now we've got this pipeline, it's very easy to copy pipelines. So we can see this is dev to prod new version. I can just copy that pipeline. And I can save it. All right, first of all, let's change it so that it's not using a new version. Let's change it so that it's actually using version 003. And you'll see that that's actually been changed all the way through. And we'll change this one to use also 003. And we'll change this one to use, let's say, 004. Okay, and we'll save that, and we'll call it 0.03 and 0.04. Say okay, we can save that. And then we'll just go back, and then we can see we've now got that new pipeline. So we can run that pipeline at any time. What we can also do inside a pipeline is download it. So we can just save that as basically saves it as an XML file. So along with exporting and importing projects, you can export and import pipelines. So as long as you export all of the projects that your pipeline uses and you export the pipeline, you can then re-import that into the same or a different instance of RapidDeploy for use later on or for backup purposes or whatever. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers pipelines. So hopefully that's a quick overview for you of some of the new features in RapidDeploy 4.1. Now that's, I clearly haven't covered all the features. All I've covered is sort of the big ticket items that are in RapidDeploy 4.1, and you can see the direction that we're going and some of the new improvements we expect to make as this version progresses. Okay, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.